It is 10 o'clock Eastern. We made it to Friday. Thanks for being here. I'm Cabrera reporting from New York. And this morning, Donald Trump is gearing up for yet another trial. He is set to appear before a D.C. federal judge in about 3 weeks. And that hearing set after former president and the 2024 GOP frontrunner pleaded not guilty yesterday to charges that he tried to overturn the 2020 election. Now, his dramatic courtroom appearance just a few minutes walk from where the January 6th violence unfolded. And joining us now is NBC's Garrett, Haake, one of the few reporters who got to go inside the courtroom with Trump. NBC News correspondent Dasha is here with us, and Carol Lam, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. So let's start with Garrett, because in addition to hearing Donald Trump's not guilty plea, the judge also set some conditions for Trump as he awaits trial. Garrett, fill us in.
Well, Anna, some of these are pretty standard. The judge told Mr. Trump he should not commit any other crimes while he's out on release, and that he needs to make sure he shows up to any additional hearings at which the government wants him to appear, although that won't include that August 28th hearing. It sounds like he'll be allowed to skip that one if he wants to. But he was also told specifically that he cannot discuss this case in any way with anyone thought to be a witness without attorneys present. That could be particularly challenging given the number of people who are still in Donald Trump's orbit who were potentially witnesses in this case, including some of those co-conspirators known and unknown. He was also told specifically that he can't do anything to intimidate or bribe or attempt to retaliate against anyone who could be a witness or otherwise involved in this case. That felt particularly Trump-specific of all the orders that were given in that case, given his long history of speaking out about witnesses and judges and prosecutors and those who he's clashed with in the legal kind of battlefield in the past, Anna. So we will see how these admonishments are followed by the former president, perhaps as early as tonight when he's back on the campaign trail at a dinner in Alabama.
And Garrett, just real quickly, as you've had a chance to sort of soak in the experience of being inside the courtroom, what's top of mind to you?
Well, look, I've been in the courtroom for all three of Donald Trump's arraignments so far, and it strikes me how much more comfortable he is getting in a situation where he was, at least initially in New York, extremely uncomfortable. You know, that was such a stunning moment, I think, for everybody to be part of that first arraignment. Yesterday, he was much more laid back, kind of joking with his attorneys, looking around the room, looking at almost everyone except Jack Smith, who sat about 15 feet from him at an angle where they could not have helped but look at each other at least once. But after perhaps meeting eyes once, Donald Trump did everything he could to avoid looking in Smith's direction. Smith, eyes on Donald Trump the entire time, kind of trying to sort of set it up as a home game for the Department of Justice in that way. The personal interplay or lack thereof between those two men is something I've been very interested in since Miami, and we'll see how often they wind up in the same rooms together as these different legal proceedings move forward.
Great reporting, Garrett. Thanks so much. Carol, what did you make of the judge warning Trump not to commit any crimes while out on bail and not to intimidate any witnesses? As I understand it, that's not something judges tell all defendants.
Yeah, and I think that Garrett had it exactly right. The initial warning, which is not to talk to any witnesses outside the presence of their attorneys, is fairly standard, but exceptions are always made for those because sometimes, for example, you might have a husband and a wife together as defendants, and of course they have to be able to talk to each other. And so I think what is likely to happen here is that the defense attorney will go to the prosecutors and say, tell us who the potential witnesses are, and of course this person travels all the time with the former president, so there has to be an exception there, and something will get negotiated out. The second part of the warning with respect to potential jurors and not intimidating them, that is a bit pointed at this stage in the proceedings, and I think what the magistrate judge was looking at was past conduct of the former president and the things that he has said, not only at his rallies, but also on social media. And it is likely that the magistrate judge had some conversation with Judge Chutkin, the district judge who will be presiding over this trial, and they decided to issue a bit of a warning shot that if things get too far, they have issued this condition of release and they will hold the former president to that condition of release.
Certainly setting a tone for these proceedings moving forward in this case. Dasha, Trump certainly seems to be back to campaigning very quickly after this. What can you tell us?
Well, I don't think we can overstate the gravity, the irony, the juxtaposition, whatever adjective you want to use here, of these charges having to do with trying to overturn an election. And this same individual, former President Donald Trump, current candidate for president, currently running in an election, right? He is a candidate for president. And if you look at the legal calendar, look at how it lines up with the election calendar, right? He knows that this is going to suck up all of the oxygen. And he knows that now he's gone through this a couple of times. He knows he can use this to his advantage. So today he's actually headed to Alabama. He's going to headline a GOP dinner there. And yesterday he used a little bit of that airtime already and started to once again hammer the message that we've heard over and over again. Take a listen.
This is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America. This is the persecution of the person that's leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So if you can't beat him, you persecute him or you prosecute him.
And, you know, Anna, he has he's put his opponents in a real bind here because they have not come out and addressed any of the substance of this indictment. So many of them are sort of echoing his message, right, saying that this is a weaponized justice system. There are two tiers of justice for Democrats and Republicans. And when this indictment in particular is about an election and his claims, his continued claims of election fraud, which are, not based in any fact. If you've got these candidates, his opponents, who won't come out and say that he did not win the election, how are they supposed to beat him when they won't disabuse voters of the notion that Donald Trump won? How can they continue to say, that this is a culture of losing, for example, Ron DeSantis's whole message?
Well, and when you're talking about the electoral process that they are currently going through. Right. Carol, the next hearing in this case is August 28th. That's when Judge Tanya Chutkan is hoping to set a trial schedule. Now, the special counsel has been up front. They want to have a speedy trial. Trump's team, not so much. Here's his defense lawyer last night on Fox.
They want to deny him his Sixth Amendment rights to counsel. They want to deny President Trump his due process rights to look at documents, to get witnesses, to use our subpoena power. They want to deny all of him those rights in a rush to judgment for one political purpose, and that's to uphold the Biden administration.
Carol, your response to that argument?
Well, Anna, whenever a prosecutor is putting together an indictment, the prosecutor has to think about how that trial is actually going to get tried to a jury of 12 of the defendant's peers. And Jack Smith has done everything he can to try to keep this trial somewhat narrow and confined, and that undoubtedly is a lot of the reason why he decided to charge only the former president in this conspiracy indictment and not the co-conspirators, because once you do that, you end up with 6 cross-examinations or 7 cross-examinations and a lot of motions filed by all of these defendants. So we've got one defendant, one case. That said, it is a large, wide-ranging indictment. There are a lot of facts. I went through the indictment. It looks like he'll need to call between 30 and 40 witnesses to try this case. So Jack Smith has that in mind. It is absolutely possible to finish this case before the November 2024 election, but he has a circumstance here that this former president is already looking at 2 other criminal indictments with trial dates already set, probably another one coming in Georgia, as well as a number of civil cases, all before the 2024 election. So there's some management that's going to have to go on among all of these cases in order for this case to get tried before 2024 November.
Yeah. All these cases are starting to pile up, and as you mentioned, it's not over yet. Carol Lam and Dasha Burns, thank you both. Let's bring in New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC contributor Peter Baker, who has a new piece out titled "For the Court of Public Opinion, Trump Relies on a Whataboutism Defense." And Peter, let me quote from what you write here. Trump now faces 78 felony counts in 3 different criminal cases, not to mention a slew of civil lawsuits and trials alleging all sorts of wrongdoing. At least in the court of public opinion, though, his defense can be boiled down to 3 words. What about Hunter? Tell us more about this strategy.
Yeah, well, you heard this literally the day his latest indictment came out. You heard it within minutes. Actually, you heard it even before it came out. The whole argument from Trump and his defenders is this is only about distracting from Hunter Biden. His is the real scandal. The Biden administration is the real crime family, and Donald Trump is the innocent victim of political persecution. And of course, you know, it's a convenient and useful and actually very effective political argument. You hear it all the time. If you go out and talk to Trump supporters across the country, you'll hear them say, they'll echo this line, what about Hunter? Now, of course, these are not comparable situations. I mean, whatever Hunter Biden has done is the subject of legitimate scrutiny when a president or a vice president's family uses his stature or status. If that's what's going on here, that's obviously something that's legitimately, that should be looked at. But whatever you think of Hunter Biden, nothing that has come out so far comes anywhere close to the issues at stake when we talk about Donald Trump. Not close to overturning an election, not close to jeopardizing national security, not close to fraudulently covering up hush payments to a porn star. And then it's also worth remembering, of course, that Hunter Biden is not, will not be, and has never been the president of the United States, whereas, of course, Donald Trump has been and wants to be again. So these are not equivalent things. But in the political sphere, the Trump defenders are using that as a way of saying, let's focus on that, not about our guy.
Right, and as you point out, they have been pouring it on, given that that's what we're seeing in all their fundraising emails coming from the former president himself. And they've been trying to tie the Hunter Biden legal trouble to President Biden, which I think is also disingenuous, given there's no evidence that the president was involved in any of Hunter Biden's wrongdoing. A Trump ally told NBC News that the more cases Trump is facing, the better, in the sense that, quote, it makes it easier to make the case that it's a witch hunt when it is more than one case. Peter, I guess that might work with his hardcore base, but I wonder, does that work with more moderate Republicans or independents?
Well, no, of course it doesn't. Obviously, if you talk about swing voters in a general election, the more indictments is not generally a recipe for political success. And, look, what else are they going to say? They're on their 3rd indictment and they're facing a possible 4th one. So they say, hey, bring it on. More indictments, the better. It has obviously not hurt him. In fact, anything helped him in the Republican primary with his base voters. That's true. But, the argument that this somehow shows a conspiracy against him is rather remarkable if you think about it, because to have all these different indictments and all these different civil cases that have been brought against him, and, by the way, a criminal case against his own family business in which they've already been found guilty, and a civil sexual abuse case in which he's been found guilty, it requires you to believe that, an extraordinary number of people, judges and prosecutors and plaintiffs and witnesses and officials and all these different jurisdictions and all these different states are all somehow on the same team and working in tandem to go after him, which, of course, is rather remarkable if you think about it.
It's just
but it's
a
useful
conspiracy
argument
theory.
because it feels like that to his people. Why do they keep coming after him? They must be coming after him because he's on my side, and it helps him with his base. And the polls show that has been a useful strategy.
Well, Peter Baker, appreciate your time, and I encourage people to read your piece. It's really, really interesting. Thank you. Happy Friday.